All right, me. It is Thursday morning, and I finally finished reading Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Um, this, it's taken me well over a month, probably closer to 2 months to read. Um, and in the meantime, I've been reading a lot of other pieces to try and escape from reading this one. Um, and it's not because it's bad or because I didn't like it. I think that this is one of the most incredible pieces of documentation and an attempt to give a history of the United States that is not singularly focused on single men achieving great things, right? And instead is attempt to tell the story of the United States from the common man and the common person and all of these issues that have plagued the people of this country. And it was wonderful, it was fantastic, but it certainly took me a long time. I certainly avoided reading it for times there, and I think the reason for that kind of becomes twofold, right? One of them is it is a lot of, I guess threefold, right? Number one, it is written in very dense language, which is what is to be expected, right? And that just takes more mental effort. Number two, it requires a great deal of recall on my part because, I read a few chapters of this during my first year at IU Northwest, for my history class there. And so, that's now 4 years ago. So, it is just so much recall that I'm having to do mentally to get to, yes, here is what I remember from this, here's what I remember being taught, and then in comparison to what is being presented by Howard Zinn, right? And there's also this continuous thing that's going on, right? Which is the having to compare what I have learned within classrooms from American history textbooks to what I have learned independently from writers also to do what Howard Zinn is doing, which is tell these stories and not stories, because I think stories can have a bad connotation to it, but rather tell this history of people in different viewpoints, right? And that my perspective on and my willingness to learn about things is a lot broader, and therefore it is very, very dense language about a lot of things that I was partially aware of but not fully aware of, that I had already known was in some way not regarded as important by the quote-unquote establishment of, what is the point of middle school and high school teaching us history, right? Which is to make us a quote-unquote good citizen, versus what do we think about when we leave, and then we are asked to learn on our own. So lots of fun stuff like that. Yeah. a great deal of this is focused on the economic viewpoint of a lot of decisions, which makes sense, right? Very early on, Howard Zinn very clearly establishes that the government of the United States is first and foremost a protectorate of business interests, and then shows and provides evidence that there is this long-term movement towards combining these two things, right? In which, in early years, there is at least a feigning of that they are separate things and can be viewed as separate entities, but eventually all decisions made by the United States federal government and choices and laws and politics are based fundamentally in the economic values of America, right? He does not go as far as to say that the United States is an oligarchy, right? He does not push the envelope that far, but certainly I would argue it's close. Yeah. I think it's such a dense piece of literature that I find it very hard to find things to talk about, especially because it took me so long to read. But I think that there's this very clear economic view that Howard Zinn places and writes about, especially towards the back half of the book. The book only goes up to the Clinton presidency, and then talks briefly about the 2000 election. It would be very, very fascinating to see where, what Howard Zinn's thoughts in this format would have been on the past, 26 years of America, right? And how much further we have gone with these things. Howard Zinn does a very interesting thing in which he talks about the role of the early American government and how, this is not, we like to feign within American history that it was this widely desired and a need for this country to be independent, right? But as Howard Zinn, ends up being able to establish, it's like 20%, 25% maybe of the American population that is interested in a new government, and freedom from England. And, that is such a far cry from what we envision things to be. Because it does not bode well for what we want this country to be and what we think would make a good citizen, right? It's the exact opposite. And then he goes on to establish that one of the biggest reasons as to why it was important for America to be independent from England was simply control of economics, right? Along with control of boundaries, right? With the 7 Years' War, French-Indian War, that there is this battle is occurring where white American settlers are constantly needing to push where they are because it is so expensive to live in America, and therefore they need to find the cheapest land possible, which that means taking Native American land. and that not being the right thing. So then, and England not wanting that, and establishing some sort of safety with Native Americans, mostly for economic reasons. And then, that becomes one of the main causes of the Revolutionary War, is simply that, right? Yeah. Lots of talk about conquest, right? The very fun quote of we thank God we take nothing by conquest, while in the middle of taking countries by conquest and just bullying them into the ground because we think that it is our right and our duty to be colonists and colonializers. And then you get into this very fun thing of where the United States at this point of we're looking at pre-World War I is kind of teetering on this verge of becoming an economic superpower and playing for this very, very major role within the world, but is still very isolated. And because that's still having massive bouts of poverty, despite having some of the richest men in the world at the same time. And then war becoming the health of the state, right? Of where it is very quickly realized in this age of industrialization that war is no longer, to look at something I just finished reading, Sun Tzu's The Art of War. War is no longer this issue of you must extract resources from those at home, right? Sun Tzu posits that it's like 20 to 30% of 30 to 40% actually of internal wealth will then be spent and taken from homes and then put into warfare. In the age of industrialization, that is no longer the case. Instead, war provides economic boons for certain people because it is their job to manufacture these things. And then it makes economic surplus look great because now you're paying multiple people for the same job. And so it looks like the average wealth of a person has gone up significantly, when the problem is that, well, you're paying people to manufacture at home, and then you're paying people to shoot those things that have been manufactured. And so you are buying your own, right? You're buying your own gun and counting that as a sale, right? And so, we then get into our heads that war is a fantastic way to boost the economy. We get to the 1920s, we get to the 1930s and the massive depression there, and then into the 1940s, and all of a sudden we are in economic boons again, and war is the health of the state, and to be at war is to be healthy. We become the economic superpower, and then it all falls apart again because war is the health of the state. The problem is we don't follow another rule by Sun Tzu, which is if you're constantly at war, your soldiers will become tired. And so we are fighting battle after battle after battle for economic spheres of influence, not for reasons, right? Not for tangible reasons that we can give. Instead, we are just fighting wars to fight wars because we want our sphere of influence and these countries that we want to be in control of more than we want the USSR to be in control of them. Howard Zinn also talks a great deal about resistance to war during the 20th century, right? And especially coming from impoverished people and people of color. And a lot of it comes down to this concept of like, we are saying that we are going to be fighting for freedom and that we are fighting to liberate these people and to protect people, and then we are not doing the same items at home, right? Which is then becomes one of the major sparks of the civil rights movement moving into the 1950s and then culminating the 1960s, of this massive issue of, we have fought this massive war and we are parading ourselves and patting ourselves on the back over the mistreatment of the people of Jewish faith within Germany. And then at the same time at home, we are arresting and entrapping people of Japanese descent. We are not giving rights and not giving access to things to African Americans, right? And it is just this massive, massive issue of what we say that we want and what we are actually doing are two vastly different things, and this hypocrisy that exists within our internal versus our foreign affairs standards are massive, right? Because then the same thing then continues throughout the 70s and 80s with arms dealing and arms movement and financially backing certain areas, right? Of where we say that we're never going to deal with terrorists, we're not going to. We want people to be free. We want people to have choices, and then proceed to overthrow left-wing regimes that are democratically elected, or we fund military groups or terrorists that are incredibly oppressive, because then they also are willing to support the United States economically, right? And it's just this massive, 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 issue of, we are willing to lie to the American people and then continue to follow different things within what we are actually doing in terms of foreign policy. All right, I think that's it. I have to say for Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. Wonderful piece. Very difficult to read, very long time to read, but wonderful, wonderful piece. Yeah.